Now look, I like a giant monster fight as much as the next heterosexual male, but just as how the first few American Godzilla movies failed because they tried to be something they were never supposed to be, I fear the Jurassic Park franchise might be heading into those same waters from the opposite heading. Before I get us lost in the metaphor triangle, let me back up to my original point of interest. It can be easily forgotten amidst all the ado about brazen genetics and all the merchandisable junk strewn thereabouts, but Jurassic Park was originally a Frankenstein-style horror film about arrogant scientists thinking they could freely tamper with nature without suffering consequences. And while it did have its share of cheap horror tricks like jump scares and fake-outs, it knew enough to not rely on them, instead letting the sinking dread naturally derive from the humans being dethroned as Isla Sorna's apex predators. And while I could pretty much just leave this video right here by saying to the corporates in Hollywood, just make a good, actually scary movie, you cowards. Stop making everything a goddamn toy commercial. We all know they wouldn't listen, even if they could hear me. So instead, I'm going to take this opportunity to A. Teach you how the concept of horror works on both a psychological and a creative level, and B. How we might go about resurrecting the genre in this new age of stupid-ass CGI and jack-in-the-box style shocks standing in for the true lingering trauma and nightmare fuel that first gave the horror scene its legs. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's start with the basics. First things first, what is horror? In a video that no one watched, and which I'll have linked down below, I defined 4 cardinal modes of fear: terror, horror, dread, and displacement. All 4 of which rely on a fundamental core element in order to work: disempowerment. As humans, we naturally sit at about a 2.5 on the trophic scale, about on par with pigs. We get bodied by pretty much everything in our own weight class, and we can't eat much other than fruits, nuts, and bugs. However, there are 3 things that allow us to act like 5s: our technology, our tribes, and our creative intelligence. Given enough time to study a problem, there's very little in nature that can overcome a group of armed humans. However, throw us out into a strange environment alone and unarmed, with no way to call for help, we go from apex predators to helpless prey in a matter of seconds. And the fact that it can happen so quickly is what the horror genre truly relies on to make its impact. Of course, the problem for a corporate studio is that this is both harder to market, as by design it makes people feel uncomfortable, and it's harder to merchandise since the most effective method of creating horror is through that lingering sense of tension that comes from ambiguity, i.e., don't show the monster. Like I said, horror relies on a sense of helplessness that comes from us being confronted by a problem we can't either fight, flee, or think our way out of. The original Jurassic Park movie used terror, the same as what would be used by a werewolf or a vampire, to make its seminal mark. This is why most people are infinitely more scared of the raptors than they were of the T-Rex. The latter was too big to chase people inside of buildings, while the former is small and cunning enough to evade our traps, to literally open our doors and to steal past our security to strike us where we're most vulnerable, thus rendering hostile those bastions which we'd formerly thought were our greatest strongholds. The problem with all of this is that this level of disempowerment is really hard to pull off in a modern setting where high-powered rifles and instant mass communications technology are ubiquitous without making circa everyone involved look like a colossal idiot. The first 2 or 3 Godzilla movies Hollywood released sucked as hard as they did because nobody goes to a Godzilla movie to see a bunch of humans squirming around in the dark. We want to see the building-sized kaiju causing destruction and mayhem while also battling other building-sized kaiju. In short, Godzilla's supposed to be a thrill ride, not a horror movie, at least not to a Western audience, seeing as how we lack the cultural and historical baggage of being on the receiving end of the first and only nuclear bomb strike ever conducted for the horror element of a radioactive sea monster to carry any legitimate weight. Jurassic Park, meanwhile, should be about people scurrying around attempting not to get eaten by dinosaurs. The question is, how do we pull that off in the modern day? Especially after the OG park was a known disaster in-universe, without making it look like this whole world is owned and operated by a bunch of overdressed monkeys, while also keeping a profit motive in it for the studios to be able to sell toys. The answer, as with most good ideas, is as simple as it is elegant. We use the elements of corporate greed and short-sightedness, magnified through the lens of managerial incompetence, both of which are naturally occurring elements of any big business environment, combined with the fact that these aren't wild animals, but genetic anomalies specifically designed to be theme park attractions. Think of it like this. The T-Rex, or as the JP fanbase has affectionately called her, Rexy, from JP the First, is much more aggressive than a wild animal should be. In the real world, most animals aren't going to wantonly jump into fights unless either forced to, or unless there's a really good incentive like access to food or mates, or in defense of themselves or their territory. Even so, T-Rex was also known to be on the smarter end of dinosaurs, possibly even pressing on the same intellectual tier as elephants or dolphins, though the jury's still far from unanimous on that. Combined with the fact that it's a predator and thus carries far more risk in every confrontation, as any injury could potentially compromise its ability to hunt and thus lead to its starvation, it would most probably exhibit extreme caution when dealing with animals its own size. Rexy does the exact opposite of that, often literally bull-rushing every other large carnivore she comes across, which results in her getting battered and beaten to within an inch of her life, usually needing to be rescued from the claws of certain death by either outside forces or plot convenience, or both. Likewise, a 10-ton carnivore isn't going to waste calories chasing after humans who'd barely make a whole mouthful. That'd be like human beings getting into a high-speed chase over a few sticks of beef jerky. But remember, Jurassic Park is a theme attraction, not a zoo, contrary to Hammond's original vision. Their main draw would more than likely be, come see the T-Rex fight a Spinosaurus. So of course, they'd engineer the animal to be unnaturally aggressive, and they'd also likely have them fitted with artificial implants that could control the animal's endocrine systems, essentially giving them a control and/or kill switch. And there would lie the vector for the animals getting out of containment and going berserk. Think about it. A simple oversight or cut corner in the neural implant software causes a cascade effect where all the animals suddenly go nuts. The prey all panic and the carnivores go on a rampant tear. On top of that, I'd have it so the park would have confiscated everyone's phones to prevent them from recording or taking pictures. You know, to stop their main attractions getting leaked onto social media. And as for why wouldn't they have adequate firepower to put down a rampaging tyrannosaur or trike? Well, the short answer is they would, but big game rifles only tend to hold 4 or 5 rounds at the most. Now, if you combine all of that with a runaway AI-powered mainframe, one whose directive prompt was something along the lines of create the most visceral and horrific experience possible, and also have it set in a location such as South America, where animal rights and legal oversight would be severely lacking, you've got yourself a perfect recipe for an adventure-style horror film. Oh, and also simply explain that there are multiple parks in almost every major world nation after the bankruptcy of InGen, the company responsible for creating the mutant dinosaurs in the first film, to justify the continual development of mutant creatures like the D-Rex as a means of attracting new visitors to the competing parks. That way, we don't have to keep retracing the increasingly nonsensical idea of militarized neoraptors, basically glorified carrier pigeons and K9 units. And it could even open up the door to things like corporate espionage, sabotage, corruption, collusion, conspiracy, and all sorts of other seedy executive behavior that would cause an innocent family vacation resort to turn into a primal-themed death trap. And as an added side bonus, this new version of the Jurassic World Order gives the writers a clear and open shot at corporations, capitalism, globalism, animal rights, GMOs, since the parks would most likely be growing fake, probably steroid-laced meat to keep those monstrously sized animals fed while lowering the costs, deregulation, most likely due to political collusion, gentrification, since these parks and islands would almost certainly be destination resorts for the uber-rich located in poorer areas with more lax regulations, government corruption, AI, and at least a dozen other talking points. So the Hollywood activists should have plenty to keep their fragile little hearts fluttering into the 2030s, assuming they all still have jobs by then. But that's a rant for another day. For right now, what do you think about my revisions? Also, I should point out that I own but have not actually yet read Michael Crichton's original novels, so if most or all of what I've said is addressed there, be sure to leave it in a comment for everyone to know. Just do it politely is all I ask. Well, actually, if you'd be so kind as to leave a like and subscribe while you're down there, I'd appreciate that too. Apparently, YouTube's gone and decided only engaged views count towards monetization, which isn't a huge deal for me with my paltry 3K sub count, but hey, it's something. But anyway, buy my books and merch too while you're at it. Come join me on these alternate platforms, and until next time, my friends, as always, stay safe, stay sane, and always remember, you can never think too much, you can only think badly. Peace be upon you.